Hi everybody, and welcome back to the latest episode of GTA Fancast with me, Gully. As usual, I'm going to be reviewing the latest fixture, which of course was a defeat to Liverpool at the weekend, 3-1 in the end, and a game of two halves, as the cliche goes. Now, I really wanted to kind of, based on the narrative that has pervaded over the last few days, especially with the not so good the not so good second half versus an exceptional first half. View the game from the perspective of what Liverpool did to really impact the way we set up. And I think obvious place to start with that is how they set up in the first place. Now, you see here I've kind of highlighted their general shape with a new kind of fangled back three with one of the fullbacks inverting. You can see Joe Gomez forming part of a box midfield as he stepped in for Trent Alexander-Arnold with a front three with Mo Salah just out of shot, just holding the width on the right-hand side where Aït-Nouri would be quite tight to him as well. And I think Wolves dealt with that really, really well. They're quite narrow, obviously, in the centre of the pitch, and any kind of link-up play and movement of the ball forward had to be quite tidy and tight in that area, and we dealt with it really well, and that kind of showed up on these two graphics here. This is the first half specifically with our defensive actions, things like tackles, interceptions, fouls even as well, and then also the ball recoveries on the right hand side there, and you can see in that middle third of the pitch where we look to kind of entice Liverpool into those spaces where our kind of elite ball retrievers, I like to call them, Lamina and Gomez, could really get to work, and we saw plenty of joy, and we were able to transition from those situations, not having to do it from a really deep part of the pitch, but then you've got the likes of Neto and Cunha who can transition brilliantly, Bellegarde as well, who showed he can do that, and we had a lot of joy in that first half, obviously off the back of that. Now, going into the game, half 1-0 up, obviously would like it to have been 2, maybe 3-0 based on some of the chances that we had. It was inevitable there was going to be a reaction from Liverpool, and this is what they did in the end. So you can see here again, I've tried to kind of link what would be ostensibly the back line, the forwards and the midfielders, and for all intents and purposes, it's a 4-2-4 where you've got the fullbacks bombing on. You can see a narrow kind of set of strikers there where Luis Diaz had obviously come on at half-time to replace Alexis McAllister and join the forward line. So you've got Jota, Gakpo, Salah and Diaz all very close to each other. And Szoboszlai and Curtis Jones form that kind of midfield pivot. And then you can see the fullbacks in really high positions. So ultimately, you've got 6 players up against our back line, which has forced our wingers, who were the outlet, especially Neto, into really deep positions. Now, for a start, that means that if you do win the ball back, they're not in a position to necessarily counter on us as quickly as they would have done. And you can see straight away the impact that had. It forced everybody deeper. And naturally, all of our activity from a defensive standpoint, any of the loose balls that we picked up, all retreated towards the edge of our box. Now, people have been commenting on the fact that we maybe came out for the second half with that kind of mentality anyway. I don't think there's a manager in the Premier League that would say to their team at half-time, sitting on a 1-0 lead, regardless of who it is, and say, you know what, let's just sit 5 yards deeper and try and repel for 45 minutes. It's just not a feasible tactic without a huge slice of fortune to go your way to go out and get a result against a team like Liverpool. Now, the other thing that the Liverpool did, which really puts under pressure, was go a hell of a lot more direct. You can see here in the first half, a lot of their passes were out to the flanks, some of those longer ones. But whilst they were less successful with those passes in terms of them reaching their target in the second half here on the right-hand side, it's a lot more, again, trying to play in behind, trying to force the defence onto the back foot. And again, natural retreating of that back line into their own half. They weren't kind of aimless balls just sent down the throat of Craig Dawson. A lot of them would have been in that first screenshot here that I showed you after that second half. This was a ball that went from Szoboszlai out to Andy Robertson, who crossed the ball for Diaz to have a header. That was within a couple of minutes of the second half kicking off. So you can see here they were being a little bit more nuanced about it, but the idea being to create a kind of more chaotic situations. They've got the weight of numbers in those forward areas now, with the 4 forwards and the fullbacks kind of supporting as well, to really take advantage of any loose balls in those areas. And if there is any team in the Premier League who thrives in those chaotic conditions, it's Liverpool. You think about when in those kind of classic Liverpool Man City fixtures where you got Guardiola and Klopp almost on a level pegging at times, when they were really, really kind of at each other's throats. Liverpool won the games where the games were much more chaotic, much more transitional, and those structured fixtures would be won by Man City generally. Liverpool are probably the best team in the league at kind of taking advantage of those situations. So then you've almost got obviously a bit of a mentality shift from the Wolves' perspective within the players. They're a bit more conservative. They're a bit more nervous. They've got a lot more to contend with in terms of the thought processes defensively, and that leads to what happens in possession as well. You can see more players in the press. From Liverpool that would have been. They've gone really, really tight in order to basically force us into playing longer passes and force us into situations that our strikers aren't going to be favourable in, especially once Fabio Silva had come on. You can see this is that situation here. Actually, Semedo's got the ball. If he plays it back to Dawson now, a confident team, a team that is really kind of well worn in their patterns and all that kind of stuff, would maybe try and play out to the left hand side, because we have got a bit of an overload. We have got opportunities there, but ultimately Craig Dawson just ends up receiving that ball and playing it down the line into Fabio Silva, who up against big centre halves loses the ball. He isn't that kind of player, regardless of what people want him to be. I don't think he's the guy who's going to go and fight centre halves and try and get us up the pitch. He's just too green, too physically not quite there yet. And especially once Ibrahima Konate came on, there was absolutely no chance of him of getting much joy from that. And you can see it in the evidence here. We've got first half longer passes. Those switches that were working really well for us in the first half was out to Neto, was out to Semedo, especially on the right-hand side as well. And that was because Liverpool weren't necessarily quite as aggressive, quite as tight in their pressing. They weren't necessarily getting out to their man as quickly as they could have done. And they were almost allowing actually that pass out to the wider areas in order to try and kind of defend those situations. But Semedo had a really good game. Neto had a really exceptional game as well. And they nullified those threats immediately, forcing Semedo back, getting the overload, which obviously led to Doherty coming on as a auxiliary fullback when Hwang went off to try and protect those runs from Andy Robertson. And then, like I say, that confidence kind of drains a little bit in terms of being able to play out. You can see a hell of a lot more direct, straight balls going forward rather than to the wider areas in the second half. And that's where you need a striker who's going to be able to grab it, hold it up, fight off a couple of centre halves and get your team up the pitch. And we just didn't have that player. People have suggested Sasha Kalajdzic might have come on instead of Fabio Silva, and whilst he's got that size aspect to it, I don't think he's necessarily a physical behemoth that you need. He's not a workhorse. He's not a Mikel Antonio, as an example, who's someone who is quite readily available to go and basically manage one half of the pitch on his own for West Ham, who will knock defenders about and really cause trouble. And we probably don't have that profile of player at the club at the moment to kind of get ourselves out of those sticky situations. And all of that led to, obviously, the catalyst for the Liverpool coming back into the game. Just little situations where I thought we let ourselves down. On the first goal, specifically, you can see here they've got that narrow front four. We've got our midfield. Whilst the design of our out of possession game first half was to entice them to pass the ball into the middle of the park, you can see Gomez and Lemina here haven't got anybody to really think about in front of them. Both the Liverpool forwards are on their shoulder. And what they aren't necessarily prepared for is Szoboszlai to go and carry the ball into the middle of the pitch. Now, that kind of sets hairs running within the defence. The goal isn't necessarily a piece of magic by Liverpool, but it's weight of numbers. It's just a little bit of interplay, and eventually they force enough pressure into that back line to cause it to collapse at that point and score the first goal. So really kind of set the tone. Now, there was a lot of time, I think, to go from there between us conceding that goal and then conceding the second. And having watched the game back, it wasn't necessarily the onslaught that we might have felt at the time. The anxiety and stress of watching a game live, obviously, it's very different to a game where you know the outcome. And having watched it back, I don't think we were as bad as people made out. It's a natural feeling to have when you've gone to a lead and then let it go, that you think straight away, we sat deeper, we didn't keep the ball well enough. Now, fundamentally, I think we're a team that was set up to retrieve the ball as opposed to keep it. And I think we don't really have the midfield set up to do that at the moment. All of those players are either really good in the duel, really good at transitioning, but not necessarily high volume passes. The likes of Neves, the likes of Moutinho, who are able to just have that sedate possession that that really allows a team to settle into a rhythm. And we're not able to do that at the moment. I think that the plan is eventually to get someone like Tommy Doyle in there to in certain games at least, to kind of allow us to do that. But this team, with the amount of time that Gary O'Neill's had with them, with the amount of transition that there's been over the summer, with obviously the late flurry of deadline day signings, we're just not there yet. We're not going to look, a complete side. I've spoken about this on Twitter already, about being able to hold our nerve. And even if we don't win the game against Luton at the weekend, I still think, there aren't alarm bells ringing for me at the moment. I think we've shown enough within spells in games to really be optimistic if we start to capitalise on our chances. And that's the bottom line for me. I think if we're going into 1 and 2-0 leads in games, we'll start to pick up more points. We've obviously had a very tough run at home as well. We've had Brighton at home. We've had Liverpool at home. Our next game is going to be Manchester City. So up until that Manchester City game is out the way, I think we're just going to have to ride it out a little bit as fans and not put too much pressure on the group. But for now, I don't think there is the level of concern that there seems to be within the fan base. So hold your nerve. Let's look forward to Luton and hopefully pick up another 3 points at the weekend.